is the most famous zoologist in Victorian Britain, Professor Richard Owen.
Owen is a formidable enemy. He's the head of natural history at the British Museum, but he's not just a scientist, he's also a political mover and shaker. It's Owen who founded this beautiful building to house his collection. It was only when Darwin published his theory that Owen's feelings of friendship turned to hatred. The interesting thing about the two men is that they once were close friends. In fact, Owen identified a number of fossils that Darwin brought back from his trip around the world.
Richard Owen is arrogant, but he is no fool. But Owen disagrees with the explanation of the natural world that requires no God. Owen is deeply religious and incensed by Darwin's implication that man is descended from an ape. Richard Owen has his own very different theory. He believes that God created a series of archetypes. These ancient creatures then became the basis for the development of all future animals in that group. Unfortunately for Owen, no one has found one of the divine archetypes that would prove his version of creation. But all this is about to change with the discovery of one of the most famous fossils of that era. In 1862, Owen bought this fossil for his museum. It's about the size of a pigeon and was dug up in Germany. It became known as Archaeopteryx, or ancient wing. Now Owen was beside himself with joy because this was the very first fossilized bird ever discovered, so he gave it pride of place in the museum. For Owen, Archaeopteryx is the original bird created by God.
What about geographical distribution where species have been isolated? The marsupials of Australia are a good example. Kangaroos, koalas, wombats, Tasmanian devils, and the now extinct dog-like marsupial the Tasmanian tiger, and all sorts of rat-like marsupials and their fossils are only found in this region. Moas, kiwis and many other distinctive species of bird, only in New Zealand. The queries just go on and on. The great Victorian naturalist Sir Richard Owen rejected the notion of a single Asiatic centre of post-diluvial dispersal from Noah's Ark because such a single centre was unimaginable, given the fact that neither Australia's characteristic mammals nor New Zealand's flyless birds would have been able to wander across. Just one example is the Australian marsupial mole. There is no way it could have migrated from the mountains of Ararat to Australia. It needs sandy ground to live in, and are found in the dune deserts. Its habitat seems to be restricted to areas where the sand is soft, as it cannot tunnel through harder materials, so there is no way it could migrated from the mountains of Ararat to Australia.
Alright, man, welcome to Crow 777 Radio, episode 55. This is The Info. Jason Lindgren is with me, and we're going to talk dinosaurs today. What's in a word? What's in a date? What's in all the things we use all the time and never think about? Well, I would assert that there's a lot in a word and a lot in a date. Let's take the word Archaeopteryx. Archaeopteryx is a little supposed dinosaur that was the missing link that showed, look, dinosaurs have feathers. They did. They turned into birds. T-Rex is now a chicken. National Geographic covered it, and it was shown to be a fraud. As a matter of fact, I think National Geographic had to do a retraction at some point, but that's not really common knowledge, and there are probably still tons of people out there who think Archaeopteryx is a real demonstration that these supposed dinosaurs had feathers at some point and became birds.
Well, maybe dinosaurs have more in common with present-day birds than they do with reptiles. Look at the pubic bone, turned backward, just like a bird. Look at the vertebrae, full of air sacs and hollows, just like a bird. And even the word raptor means bird of prey.
That doesn't look very scary. More like a 6-foot turkey.
T-Rex is in fact a chicken now. We eat him for dinner. That sets aside that at one point T-Rex was filling our tanks because it was contributing to the fossil fuel, which is an old idea which was thrown by the wayside, but I was taught it in school. So what's in a word? Well, take the word Archaeopteryx. The suffix in that word is trix, and that's what it was. It was a trick, as is the whole idea of dinosaurs. So many people will be upset by this because they've been told their whole life and shown movies and shown pictures and shown textbooks and taught in school that dinosaurs existed. Yet, if you take the time to challenge dinosaurs, you will quickly find that they were invented in 1842, in or around 1842, as the Darwin evolution idea was about to come to light, and it was put forward by a knight of the royal court of Britain, who also was the superintendent or some such of the Natural History Museum, so placed well so that he could further the dinosaur nonsense. He also invented dinosaurs years before any bone, tooth, fragment, or any other supposed part of an ancient dinosaur had ever been found. You know, I've covered in episodes how in our culture we teach our kids to believe in fantasy, things like Santa Claus, Easter Bunny. Then they get old enough, they understand they've been lied to, then they get older, they have kids, and they start the cycle all over again. Dinosaurs is no different, except the problem here is that most people that believe in dinosaurs are adults. I say so often, belief is the enemy of knowing, and people ask me what that means. Well, case in point, dinosaurs. If you think dinosaurs are real, why do you think they're real? Is it because you have chosen to believe in them and never challenged or investigated how we got the notion, the mental image of dinosaurs? And I'm here to tell you, it was invented in the 1800s by people associated with the royal court. It was mixed into the idea of evolution and Darwinism, probably. And you can track it forward to the point where you understand no dinosaur skull has ever been seen by a person who is not invested in the idea of dinosaurs. No complete dinosaur skeleton has ever been discovered. So what it comes down to is, if this show, where I'm flat out stating that dinosaurs never existed, ever, in this world, and that upsets you, it's because you're choosing to believe in it. Because if you examine what we've been handed, you will quickly understand it's a fantasy-based reality. Anyhow, this is a good episode. Let's jump in with Jason for episode 55 on the dinosaur hoax. Cheers. All right, man. Welcome to Crow 777 Radio Podcast. This is episode 55. Jason and I are going to cover a topic that's probably going to make a lot of people's heads spin. But personally, I make no apology. I don't know where Jason stands. So many things in this world. So many things in this world. We can track back to sci-fi writers. We can track back to when they came into existence by date, or at least the date that we are handed to accept these things. And I would ask everyone, what is in a name? What is in a date? What is in an idea? Well, a hell of a lot. Matter of fact, everything. It has been said the devils are in the details, and dinosaurs are no different, man. The devil is in the details. If I was to tell you that dinosaurs never existed, I imagine about 80% of the people, at least, listening to me right now probably just rolled their eyes and went somewhere else. But guess what? Dinosaurs never existed. If you can hold on long enough to hear some of the things we're going to cover, and have an open enough mind to understand that there is a difference between just choosing to believe in a thing and challenging a thing, you will find out very quickly that there is a there. Anyhow, Jason, welcome, man.
Hello again, Crow, and this is going to be another very interesting topic, I think.
Yeah, man, I mean, what's the old saying? What a wicked web we weave when we practice to deceive. There's almost no portion of our cultural existence and even our scholastic existence that has not been tampered with by people who had a lot of money or a lot of power back in the day. Whatever that day may have been. I'm very suspicious of history, but nonetheless, we often run a timeline here because this is the history we're handed. And so often, in so many of these nonsense things that we have all grown up believing in, like Santa Claus, we find these other things like dinosaurs that, I mean, it's programmed into us from from the very beginning. Think of the number of like Disney-esque movies and rubber toys and other things that are getting children indoctrinated into the idea of dinosaurs. It's crazy to think about. Even, going further with Jurassic Park and other things, these things are simply made up out of whole cloth. I'm not sure where you stand on it, but we've got quite a list. You put together a great timeline. I did a lot of research, and I've been looking at this idea actually for a long time. So I'll just kick it straight over to you, Jason. Let's jump in before too many people pass out thinking that we're pulling their chain, and let's lay down some facts.
All right, so first thing we're going to do is start off with a few definitions so that when we get into the later information, everyone is on the same field here. First of all, dinosaurs translates as terrible lizard or fearfully great reptile.
I can actually add a little bit before you jump forward, Jason. I did some etymology work before on this, and if we just take saurus, people might be surprised to understand that in the figurative sense of the word, it is a person or institution not adapting to change, and it's from 1952. But I dug deeper into the etymology. I used really old dictionaries that I have around the house and other things. Did you know that the element used in forming dinosaur names from the Latinized form of the Greek sauros, lizard, is a word of unknown origin? So I decided to quickly do the simple English gematria where it comes out to 101, which is of course 11, and I have covered so often in this show. In my view, when we see 11 encoded into a word many times or into an event, we are looking at the beginning of the casting of a spell. But there's even a little bit more before I kick it back to Jason. Apparently there's only one place in the world you can legally hunt for dinosaurs if you're not someone official, and that is in or around Vernal, Utah, of all places. And that's interesting to me. So often I cover the equinoxes and the solstices. The word vernal, which I didn't have to look up because I've done etymology and actually gone a lot further than etymology on that word so many times. The word vernal means spring. It relates directly to the spring equinox, so we're actually talking about the sun supposedly coming across the equator at the spring equinox. That's the globist, kind of definition of that word. But just to put it into context, whenever we see anything that relates to equinoxes and solstices, we're looking at something encoding the sun. We should take a closer look at the place. This place in Utah actually issues licenses, and there's a catch. You are licensed to do the following. These are the only 4 types of dinosaurs you're allowed to hunt in vernal equinox. A Tyrannosaurus rex, but you can only go for 1 adult male. I'm not kidding. The next one is a Diplodocus gigantus, and you can hunt 1 only of either sex, and it cannot weigh less than 5,000 pounds live weight. And I'm not even making this up, guys. The third one is a Stegosaurus. You can only get 2 of those, males of any size. The last one is a pterodactyl, or a pterodactyli, I guess as it's written. I don't know if there's a difference or a distinction. Of those, you can only take 4, but you can't take their young. And lastly, before I kick it back to Jason, would you be interested to understand, because a long, long time ago when I got going on this, I was reading that there was no dinosaur skull in existence that had ever been displayed anywhere. And this appears to be true. Well, I know it's true because I know dinosaurs don't exist, but apparently there have been no people as independent researchers or not associated with people who have a vested interest in the dinosaur idea have ever been allowed to examine a real dinosaur skull. So before I get too much further into this, I'm going to kick it back over to Jason, and we're going to do some groundwork to tie this to the petroleum industry. Go ahead, Jason.
And everything you just threw out there is just wow to begin with,
Yeah, I mean, the devil is truly in the details. When you begin to actually stop just saying, I accept this stuff I've been told my whole life, and, set aside the dinosaurs you played with as a kid and the movies you've seen ad nauseum and challenge it, you come up pretty quickly understanding that there's shenanigans afoot, man.
Absolutely. And there's a few more definitions I want everyone to be familiar with before we take the terrible lizards through terrible history. So, abiotic oil. This is the theory that petroleum, coal, and natural gas are formed naturally under certain conditions in the Earth's crust and would essentially act as a lubricant for tectonic plates that make up the understructure of the continents. There are variations on the theory of how it is actually produced and where it may have come from, but the overall idea is that that it's natural and not produced from the decomposition of organisms. This has been proven as the likeliest source of petroleum, as there have been old wells that have been tapped dry, years later opening them back up, and boom, there's oil in it again. And this is all comes from Russian scientists many decades ago, and it just kind of proliferated out into the scientific community.
As I began to look in the abiotic oil idea, there were a lot of mainstream scientists trying to call this fraud. I mean, there was a lot of effort spent to call it fraud. But anyhow, go ahead, get right into fossil fuel. And there's no getting away from it, man. It is named fossil fuel. What does that bring to mind? Hint, hint. Go ahead.
That's the notion that all petroleum, coal, and natural gas deposits are formed by natural processes such as anaerobic decomposition of buried dead organisms, containing energy originating from ancient photosynthesis. The age of the deceased organisms being used in this process would be in the millions of years old. This theory works very well for the oil industry as a whole because it keeps the notion of limited availability as a perpetual concept, and this notion is called peak oil. And this is something they've been scaring us with for decades, and I want to give a personal story here. When I was in 3rd grade, which would have been in the early 80s, they showed us a film, and why they're showing kids this, I don't know, but it was showing just how much of coal, gas, and oil in general was left in the world. And it was like some ridiculous amount. Like I remember at the time thinking, oh my goodness, when I'm an adult, it's going to be running out. And it was totally programming us to be scared of this concept. It was, I mean, let's just be blunt here. It was complete and utter bullshit. They were programming us, and I was in the advanced programs as well. So you can see that there's dirty pool afoot right from the get-go.
Yeah, there's no doubt. And, you know, before I get into this, because I'm old enough to remember the 70s and this notion of peak oil or always having the scarcity, this is done with so many products where you're convinced there's a scarcity and it allows the market to do many things with that product. But I'll give a shout out to the Jungle Surfer. I don't follow a lot of people on YouTube. As a matter of fact, I don't use a lot of social media or anything else online, to be honest. But he's one of the earliest guys I know that began to challenge the dinosaur idea. I'm sure there's others out there. I'm just not aware of them. And he's also, having gone through the dino idea, he's now beginning to challenge the idea of how gas is made. And I think this is a critical thing that really needs to be done. I mean, I can remember cartoons in school that were teaching cartoons where they're literally showing images of dinosaurs and other things that are supposedly becoming oil. But in 1973, for those of us that are old enough to remember, there was a gas crisis. At the time, I was driving across the country with my family to come to Rhode Island from San Diego. The lines were insane, blocks long often. We were told the Arab petroleum exporting countries had proclaimed an oil embargo because of the United States support of Israel during the Yom Kippur War. Yom Kippur, of course, falls near, I believe, the fall equinox. I hope I've got that right. But anyhow, as we came across, it got to the point where we weren't sure we were going to be able to make it because they had the last digit on your license plate was either odd or even, and that would dictate what days you could get gas. Well, this whole thing relapsed again in 1979. They went back at it, causing an oil problem for the United States. And at that time, the Iranian Revolution was cited. These are total manipulations of the market. And the reason we're getting into the gas idea at all, Jason and I, is because there's no separating the dinosaur idea from the oil and gas idea. And if in fact you're a person who can investigate and come to the conclusion that dinosaurs are a hoax, the next thing down the line for you is we got to take a look at gas and oil and how that's produced and where it comes from. Anyhow, back to you, Jason.
All right, so getting into the history of the dinosaur phenomenon, before even a tooth or toenail was found and presented to the scientific community, the word dinosauria was coined by Sir Richard Owen of the Royal Society in 1842. So let's just take that apart right there. Somebody who is knighted by the aristocracy.
Okay, let's do it. There he is, man. Sir Richard Owen. We've done this before. When you get a sir before your name, it basically means you're a servant. But you're not a servant to just any old place or person. You are a servant to the royal house that knighted you. So here we have Richard Owen. Well, let me come at this a different way. Basically, dinosaurs were invented in 1842. There it is. That's going to be a shock for a lot of people to hear, but here we have this knighted man of the Royal Society coming up with a word to describe dinosaurs as we know them today without a shred of evidence of any kind that they ever existed. Back over to you, Jason.
So Sir Richard Owen was the superintendent of the British Museum Natural History Department when he put forth the notion of Dinosauria. As of this point, nothing whatsoever had been found. It was completely 100% pure conjecture and theory. This was during the time when theories on evolution and natural selection were taking hold and the mechanics of which were being hotly debated in the scientific community. The Darwin book that everyone knows on the origin of species doesn't come out until 1859. So there were a lot of theories still floating around, and somehow Sir Richard Owen got the notion of these giant lizards even though they weren't even trying to tie anything together yet.
And I don't think there's any separating, Jason, the ideas for what came out in the origin of species attributed to Darwin was absolutely in the halls of these royal scientific, societies. As a matter of fact, I don't think there's any separating the idea of dinosaurs from Darwin's theory of evolution, but I'll let you keep kicking through here before we beat that bull.
Yeah, the idea here is that Owen was merely speculating on this possibility in the very long past. Now, Owen is one of many figures with direct ties to the upper echelon of the British aristocracy. Of course, if he's got a Sir in his title, we already know this. He is said to have been a very driven individual with fits of anger and all that kind of thing, and he was even hated by some of his fellows in the scientific community. One of these people that apparently he didn't get along with was a biologist named Thomas Henry Huxley. And yes, the Huxley family that we're familiar with. He was the grandfather of Aldous and Julian Huxley. So already we have the groundwork being laid of these people with the globalist elitist ties.
Yeah, we need to get a cheesy little audio clip that goes dun dun dun. I mean, how many people that have followed here have heard us talk about Huxley, the author of Brave New World? Brave New World, as I have said, along with Animal Farm and 1984, all have to do with what the controllers of this world are working towards. Brave New World is basically the foundational blueprint, one of the oldest things we can point to. There's even relations to the Tavistock Institute with all this, but to make this point even a little more narrow, Aldous Huxley, the writer of Brave New World, who is hovering around this, new dinosaur idea, was a member of the Royal Society of Literature. I cannot tell you how many sci-fi writers we have attributed modern nonsense that we all believe in as the creators of these modern nonsenses. So to put it in a nutshell before we move on, basically the idea of dinosaurs was invented in 1842. And well, I won't go there because I know it's in a different bullet point, Jason, so I'll wait before we go about the other societies that may have preceded 1842. There's no separating it from the idea of Darwin, which I don't accept for a second.
We're reforming the Linnaean Society. The committee will comprise of myself, Lyle, Hooker, yourself, of course, if you're game for it. Now that Hooker and I finally have a bit of clout, we can start to reclaim science as a profession, wrested away the country parsons and beetle collectors.
Some of whom are dear friends of mine.
Your book will be our rallying point.
No, it won't. There is no book. Fragments, and they're not in any fit state.
Nonsense. I've read your detailed abstract, and the argument is hugely powerful. Clear evidence of transformation over millions of years, from a free-swimming prawn to a shellfish stuck on a rock.
Well, that's my point. You see, you can't be entirely sure of that, and that's why I need more time. I need...
Mr. Darwin, sir.
Yes?
Either you are being disingenuous, or you do not fully understand your own theory. Evidently, what is true of the barnacle is true of all creatures, even humans. Clearly, the Almighty can no longer claim to have authored every species in under a week. You've killed God, sir.
And some of the people who were around when Darwin was making the idea of evolution and these other things, and then DNA comes down the road. There's a lot of people who have gone on the record. One guy who was actually directly related to the DNA idea, said there's no way that evolution accounts for this and in random events. And in his words, he said something to the effect, it would be akin to a hurricane going through a junkyard and producing a working jet airplane out the other side. And when you begin to look at what we're being told here, any logical person can't help but opt with a man who would say that, because clearly the timelines are not long enough for what Darwin is putting forward, and it's clear that however people got here is being covered up. But I kind of tracked off a bit there. I just want to make it abundantly clear. This is something like the 7th or 8th episode where we have implicated Aldous Huxley, the writer of Brave New World, with the beginnings of dinosaurs. So back over to you.
And the interesting thing looking at this research, in the 1800s, how life originated and changed on Earth over time was very hotly debated. It wasn't until much later that the general consensus settled on the Darwinian evolution. And now it's just been pounded into people so much, it's just the accepted notion. But a lot of brilliant people back then weren't satisfied. They were trying to pick it apart. So
yeah, well, just to put a little finer point on the relationship between dinosaurs and modern media and Darwin, they are making a run. You know, what's that guy's name? Jack Horner. And for anyone who's not aware what the name Jack means, it's often relatable to Joker, which is why Jack Nicholson played the Joker in Batman. You can go do research on that. Black Jack. Anyhow, when we begin to look at the idea what Darwin said, dinosaurs play into this, because we're being told things now by people like Jack Horner that T-Rex became a chicken. Well, there's your mercurial idea, the rooster again, you know, the idea of transmuting the world mind into this lower childish mind that believes in fairy tales like Santa Claus and dinosaurs. The Darwinian idea plays directly into what we've been told about dinosaurs, because we're told that these things crawled out of the slime, and then we had dinosaurs and all these things go on, and then this big rock or a comet from space destroys them all, but all the mammals live and all these other things. So there really is no separating what we've been told about dinosaurs from the Darwinian nonsense, in my view.
Yep. The notion of dinosaurs' one-time existence on the Earth a very long time ago seems to have been put out into the mainstream public with absolutely no physical evidence whatsoever to back up any of these notions. So Owen suggests this in 1842, and over the next few years, it just kind of leaks out into the media and people discuss it. Now, many theories on evolution and transmutation are discussed in the halls of science for decades, all through the 1800s, as we have been discussing, and quite honestly, nothing has actually been 100% proven to this day. It's still called the theory of evolution.
Right, exactly. It's like gravity. You know, at what point does gravity, you know, they claim they find gravity waves in the modern day. At what point does that quit being a theory? You know, it almost begs to be challenged just on those grounds alone. But here you're talking about evolution and transmutation. There is no getting away from the alchemical idea whenever the idea of transmutation comes into it. And again, consider how many movies have come out of Hollywood for children to buy into dinosaurs, all the toys, all the everything. In my view, this is transmuting the world mind into a fantasy-based reality. Back over to you, man.
Yeah, and that's what we're going to see. The reason why we're doing this the way we are, it's going to all come back to money, just like everything does. So anyway, although bones had been found earlier whose finders were uncertain as to their identity, the first actual claim of a dinosaur fossil is, according to mainstream history anyway, attributed to a find in 1854 by Ferdinand Vanderveer Hayden, who was an American geologist, and he was exploring the upper Missouri River at the time. This discovery was in the form of some unidentified teeth. Hayden sent them to paleontologist Joseph Leidy, who was professor of anatomy at the University of Pennsylvania, and later would become a professor of natural history at Swarthmore College in Pennsylvania. Leidy would later go on to get numerous dinosaur fossils from Hayden, nearly all of which are said to be housed at the Smithsonian Institution in Washington, D.C. Now, my first problem with any of this, right off the bat, is how can you even mentally reconstruct an entire creature just based off some teeth? Like, that just seems to be nice, a far stretch of the imagination.
Right, and if I remember correctly, the person who's in charge of the Smithsonian is the Vice President of the United States. You can see the complicity, but one thing that jumped out at me right away was we find our first dinosaur fossil in 1854, which of course broken down into basic numerology encodes 666 coming back to 18. 18 is often used to encode 666. There's no getting away from the things you're pointing out here and the complicity of universities, which we have covered in our music shows, what went on in the 60s and the 50s, the LSD period, all these things showing the complicity of universities, particularly the Cal State system in California, who has everything to do with Big Bang and that storyline, and NASA. But it has been claimed that many of the fossils that were put together early on came from many types of bones. Now, these things are nearly impossible to go back and substantiate in any way, but there was a recent, well, maybe a year ago or 2 years ago or something like that, I was reading, and there was a claim being made that they'd found, I think it was either an Allosaurus or a T-Rex skeleton, the most complete ever found to date or something like this. You hear that a lot. And by the way, they've never found a complete dinosaur skeleton ever. They were making the claim that the bones were so radioactive, they had to be painted with lead paint. Anyone can go to a search engine and look this up. I'm not making this stuff up. And it was playing into the idea on a few levels. It's the fear porn of radiation, and we've already shown that nuclear weapons and nukes, as they've been explained, are a complete nonsense. So the idea that there are radioactive bones is complete nonsense. But it further gives them excuses to lock bones away and to make casts of them and to make replicas of them, which, by the way, any museum you walk into in the world, those are not real dinosaur bones that you're seeing there. They're replicas.
There you go, here we're at the museum, we're going to debunk it. Look at this. That's not bone. Oh, that's plaster of Paris. That was a real bone then. Debunked. Pretty impressive. But again. Oh, shit. It's not bone.
There are no real dinosaurs on display. Anyhow, I'm kind of rambling, Jason. Back over to you.
There's some extreme suspicion that in general, no ancient tribes, cultures, or anything whatsoever all over the world have ever mentioned anything ever relating to dinosaurs. Now, I'm sure a lot of people are going to scream and yell that, yeah, they have, but nothing solid. There's no solid evidence that, and I looked, there are people finding bones and things that they didn't identify, but there's nothing that actually relates to this whole specific giant lizard thing. It wasn't until after the initial announcement in the mid-1800s that dinosaur fossils were all of a sudden being found all over the world, and frequently, and this is really weird in and of itself, there'd be large deposits in one single location. And a lot of these locations are places that humans would have tromped all over for years and years and years. So the whole thing just seems really bizarre right there. Very questionable.